Greetings, I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is the Book Report. Today I'm going to talk about two books that are in the self-help category, although I think they have far more educational credentials than just how to do something a little bit better. The first one is called No More Mr. Nice Guy by Dr. Robert Glover, which came out in 2003. And another one, which was a bestseller at the time it came out, is Outliers, The Story of Success by Malcolm Gladwell. That came out in 2008. Now, let's get into No More Mr. Nice Guy first. There are only two books that I remember putting my life on hold to read and not stop. The first one was The Hunt for Red October, which was the classic spy novel. The novel is 1,000 times better than the movie, but that's a different review for a different time. I started reading that in the evening and didn't finish it until early the next afternoon and had to call in sick. The only other book in that category in my reading history was No More Mr. Nice Guy. That book has the subtitle, A Proven Plan for Getting What You Want in Love, Sex, and Life. That's a misnomer. The book is more about the history and also the current problems of females influencing the world of men. It's how men have changed, and not for the better, because of all the women who have been trying to teach men how to be men for the last several decades, in fact, probably going back nearly a century at this point. It's been a creeping thing, almost like cancer. The book goes into examples, and it does so in a very, very positive narrative, almost like an instruction manual. Because, like it or not, we are living in an age where women and men have forgotten how to be what they are born to be. And if you look at the headlines, well, it's kind of self-evident what is going on. This is being recorded shortly after Donald Trump was reelected in 2024. I don't know when you're going to be hearing this, but one of the things we're seeing at this time is how totally insane women who were backing his opponent, Kamala Harris, have gone, and how much they're flaunting their mental illness all over the internet. It's actually quite frightening in a way. But it goes into how, in spite of the best of intentions for women teaching men how to be men, it's had the opposite effect. Now, without going into all the details, I think the book explains itself better than anything. When I read this, I was just mesmerized, saying, wow, no wonder things are such a mess in the United States. And I read this book shortly after returning to the United States after living overseas for most of my life. And I lived in the Far East, where traditional roles of men and women are adhered to, although they're not in any way barbaric or, well, there's a lot of misconceptions about women in the Far East being submissive. American men and women have gotten to be adversaries over the last several decades, and nature intended us to be cooperative with each other. A lot of other cultures out there are very healthy in some ways because they never forgot that men and women are different for a reason and are meant to be part of a unit and not enemies. Anyway, this is a book that every man should read. Every man in the United States, no matter how macho you think you are, no matter how well placed you are in society, no matter how healthy your marriage is or how healthy you think it is. This is a book that I think should be included in any school curriculum for young men entering adolescence. It's also a book that should be read by people making public policy, because as the nation around us is a mess, and much of the reason is because men and women have forgotten how to be men and women. Well, this would be the first step in correcting that problem. Again, the book is No More Mr. Nice Guy by Dr. Robert Glover. It was published and still is being published by Running Press back in 2003. It's available in hardcover, softcover, electronic book formats like Kindle, and on Audible. Now, the other book, which does fly in the face of some, I must say, so-called conservative right-wing views is Outliers, The Story of Success. And that was written by Malcolm Gladwell, and it came out in 2008. It was a number one bestseller at the time. I've always wondered why all these books that were number one bestsellers, people seem to forget the lessons once they're read. Now, this book is probably the most important anyone could read to understand how the world really works and how a lot of your life is going to be determined more by circumstances than you would like or you've probably been told. There is a myth, and it is a myth, that everyone can be successful so long as they apply themselves. Well, to an extent that's true, but circumstances play a much more significant role in people's success in life, or their happiness, or whether or not they even survive, than a lot of people like to accept. And this book will educate people who are of that belief. Part of this that's really interesting is it goes into, well, the 10,000 hour rule of what's needed to be successful. You have to put at least 10,000 hours into it. And there are several cases that are put in there, including the rock band, the Beatles. Whether you like the Beatles or not, they were successful. Another thing that I found fascinating while reading this book is that unless you were born in the year 1954, 1955, and 1956, you were not going to be a mover and shaker during the computer revolution that occurred in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. That was fascinating. And I knew people who were successful who were born in those years, and I was reading this and thinking, wow, this is true. It also goes into culture. How it goes into the tragic Avianca airline crash in Long Island some years ago. It went into how cultural relationships and communication played a major role in that. If you're born in certain countries and certain cultures, you're going to be maybe more submissive, or you're going to be much more aggressive. One thing I learned some time ago from a security officer is that if you're wearing a uniform and you're in a Hispanic neighborhood of immigrants, they're going to pay a lot more attention to you than another ethnic group might, just because they grew up in that culture. The thing that I found most fascinating, the little item in that book, and again, I'm not going to go into all the details because these are books I think you really should read, people, is that if you're born in Canada at the wrong time of the year, no matter how great a hockey player you are, you could be the best hockey player in the history of the world. If you're born in the wrong time in Canada, you are not going to be a professional hockey player. Now, that was shocking. But there are all sorts of examples throughout our society where that's the case. You see, things have gotten to be so complex in our civilization that we don't take advantage of genius. We don't take advantage of people who are special. There are people probably living on the streets of the United States right now who can contribute so much if the right circumstances are presented to them. At the same time, there are people who have reached the pinnacle of power who shouldn't be there. You know, some of these people that we see in the computer industry or in social media, at another time in history, their aspiration in life would be the office techno nerd who'd be responsible for the photocopier machine being kept up. Yet these people became captains of industry. I know people who, I'm not going to name any names because some of them are quite famous and I know them, but these are people who, because they've been very successful in one section of business, because they have accumulated so much wealth, they have the ability to go in and influence public policy. And if you really think about that, that's wrong. If somebody makes an awful lot of money making tractors, should they be responsible for health care? No. Now, Outliers is also a good guide as to how to apply yourself in different places. Outliers is a good book if you want to be successful at something, especially if you're starting off in life. I wish I had read this or had this book when I was a teenager. I think my life would have gone into different places and probably better ones. The 10,000 hour rule does apply. Now, I was a fan of a rock and roll band called Yes, which still I think exists in some form, but the late, great bass player Chris Squire was really the power behind that particular endeavor. And he got sick on some bad drugs when he was very young and very stupid. And while he was recovering, he practiced playing bass guitar. And he practiced and he practiced and he practiced. And I was reading this book and I was thinking, that must have been Chris Squire, because he practiced for months. He went well past the 10,000 hour rule. And he became one of the greatest bass guitar players of, his era. And it could apply to anything else. So it's a great book. It should be included in any kit for someone who wants to build or expand on their career or even get into a new one. And that again is Outliers, The Story of Success. Malcolm Gladwell is the author. It came out by the publishing house Little in 2008. And it is, of course, available in hardcover, softcover, electronic book format such as Kindle, and on Audible. Well, that's it for your reading list for today. If you appreciate my work here on Substack, please like and subscribe, share with your friends, and I urge you to get a paid subscription. There are some things that are only available to paid members. At the same time, I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. A place a lot of people like to reach me at, though, is the chat or the message center on Substack itself. The address there is aureliancolumn.substack.com. I'm up on X. The handle there is MICCAMPEN, MICCAMPEN. I'm up on Telegram. I'm up on a few other places. And as always, I am not on Facebook. That's it for today. Be good, be safe, be vigilant, and don't forget to keep reading. Good day.